X is for X-ray in the ABCs of modified theology. And today we want to ask the question, what do you do when your technology exceeds your ability to understand it? Is there a danger when our technology goes beyond the scope of most humans' capacity to understand it? I am fascinated with the changes that have happened in the last 100 years in our globalized world. You ever see those things that say, 100 years ago today, right? Or on this day in history. But if you go back 100 years, it is shocking how fast history is moving and how quickly technology is changing our world and our existence and the way we relate to one another and just our daily life. 100 years ago, we were wrapping up World War I. And if you don't think a lot has changed since then, talk to me about the Habsburg dynasty. Because just over 100 years ago, it was the largest and most powerful entity on the planet, and yet we know almost nothing about it today. In fact, when we look at the buildup of World War I, it's really confusing. You're like, wait, so this archbishop was down here, and then this duke, and then this guy, he shot this guy, which pulled in this country, and then everyone had to rally, and you just think, what in the world? In fact, it's noteworthy that 100 years ago, the most popular view of eschatology or things of the end, that the most prominent perspective when it came to this was called post-millennialism. And it's basically the belief that we were improving society at such a rate that we were going to bring in the reign and rule of God. It was that the millennium was post us making our improvements. And the 20th century got labeled the Christian century. Within that 100 years, though, post-millennium fell out of favor so quickly after the two great world wars, to the point that almost no one knows what it is anymore. We have moved towards a premillennial understanding where you have to go through crisis, and that's what ushers in the second coming, as it gets called, and then God fixes everything. Post-millennialism fell out of favor faster than the telegraph. And it only exists today in really small pockets, but now it gets called dominionism or dominion theology, but that's a subject for a different day. The 20th century also saw seismic shifts in technology like the telephone, the airplane, vaccines, and the radio. It marked the end of an era. The way that we got information, that we related to one another, how we spent our day, things changed rapidly in the early part of the 20th century. And the X-ray for me is a perfect illustration of this era. It came about in the late 1800s, around 1895, but the impact that it had in the early 1900s was profound. The ability to see into the human body is remarkable, and it transformed not just how we practice medicine, but how we conceptualize the human body. I read this passage one time, which I cannot find anymore, about how the Apostle Paul's perspective would have changed, how it would have impacted his writing if he had been able to take an airplane flight, like a transatlantic flight, or if he had seen that famous picture of Earth from the moon and that little blue marble about how we're all on this planet together, and how it would have changed his perspective and his cosmology. I bring this up because in every other field besides theology or religion, whether it's medicine or communication or psychology or economics or politics, every other field we are encouraged to, and we get to advance and adapt and evolve and transform our understanding. But then when it comes to religion, we are bound to the thinking of pre-moderns. This antiquated way of viewing the three-tiered universe and the cosmology that's associated with it. Why are we bound to that as an understanding? Why can't we update? There is something particular and peculiar about religious thought that needs to be examined and interrogated. I understand people who want to conserve the tradition. I don't agree, but I understand their conserving impulse. I prefer, however, an approach that is both incarnational, it's embodied, enacted, and it's also contextual, it's located. The central story of Christianity is about an embodied, an incarnation, an embodiment in time and place. And so our faith has to be calibrated or recalibrated, reformed, and remembered, as we say, within our cultural context. Faith, like a language, doesn't happen in a faith, like a language, doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's inherited. There's a givenness to faith. We receive what is handed down. And the amazing thing about that is that not only for, let's say, English, not only does English help me, once I have learned it, express my true feelings and beliefs and sentiments, but also the symbolic relationship, the symbiosis, is that English is getting itself spoken through me. It remains alive only when people speak it. This is why there are dead languages. But faith is also enacted. It has to be performed or done. It is embodied. So we have a delicate dance between honoring the tradition and expressing it in our time and place, taking what has been passed on to us and actually doing it, enacting it, embodying those beliefs. We live in the time of the telescope and the microscope. We know lots about how the blood circulates and how the human body works, but we also know that the earth isn't the center of the universe and that the earth revolves around the sun. These two things, the microscope and the telescope, are perfect illustrations for how reason needs to be integrated. New data needs to be integrated into our faith and our understanding religiously. But we live in a nuclear age. Between the X-ray and the nuclear bomb and the microwave, it's just the tip of the iceberg. I haven't even touched on TVs and cell phones, no-fault divorces, Christian mingle websites, and credit card giving machines in the pews. Why? When we live in an area, why? When every area of our life, from medicine to politics to economics to psychology, involves updating and evolving, why do religions insist on holding on to the cosmology and the metaphysics and the epistemology of the pre-modern world? When we get sick, even conservative and traditional folks will take an aspirin or get an X-ray. The Christian faith is based on a story of incarnation. It is designed to be embodied in time and place. To hamper this process of adaptation and adjustment, it's not only to miss the point of the entire story, but to worship and to idolize a moment in the development of the trajectory. We do not live in the enchanted world pre-Enlightenment, pre-Reformation, pre-Industrial Revolution. We just don't live in that same enchanted world. And this is where I love the concept of a second naivete. I love how Paul Ricoeur talks about the second naivete, that you come to faith again after faith, but with eyes wide open, adjusted to the new reality, to be called again beyond the desert of criticism. So because the gospel is designed to be incarnate, the carnitas, right? The carne, and embodied in our bodies, we have no fear of losing the gospel's essential character by appropriating it to our time and place. We live, as Bonhoeffer talks about, in a world come of age, and it's time for a response to the nuclear age, because our technology is in danger of outsizing our theology. I would love to hear your thoughts and your comments, your concerns, and your criticisms. I'll look forward to this ongoing conversation.